You will hear some students talking about their studies. Listen carefully and answer questions 1 to 4.
It was packed. There simply aren't enough seats in Theatre 4. There were people on the stairs, people in the aisles. I don't imagine everybody was able to get in.
Was Jack with you?
No, of course not. I saw him with a pile of journals in the library as I walked past. You haven't seen him because you've been in here in the kitchen drinking coffee all morning, whereas he has been studying hard.
Not me. I've been in my bedroom reading for my assignment on education in the classical world. Very interesting. It was easier than I expected. I should have been at the gym training for my next race, but that'll have to wait. And did you find your first lecture interesting?
Absolutely fascinating. We talked about this experiment. If you show a child a litre of water in a bucket and show him a litre of water in a tall container, he always thinks that the higher, taller but narrower container has more water in it.
Hold on, what do you show him?
Right. You show him two things. A bucket with a litre of water in it, and also a tall glass vase-like thing or any tall container. This also has a litre of water in it. Now, he will say that the tall thing has more in it than the short fat thing, that is, the bucket. And all children will say this, that is, up to about 5 years of age. You can then actually pour a litre of water from the bucket into the taller, narrower container, and the child will still say that the tall container contains more water, even though he's just seen the water come out of the bucket.
And what's the point of that? Is it about measurement?
No, it showed how children are quite unable to think logically. It's connected with my assignment. It's about cognitive development of young children over time. That's to say, it's about how they think. But didn't you do that assignment last year?
No, I didn't. You see, I missed out on the first year when I changed subject.
Now answer questions 5 to 10.
I started psychology in the second year, which is where I am now.
Lucky you.
I'm not so sure. I've missed out on a lot of the basic stuff like that, and I will have to catch up in my own time, so I'm relying on you.
Oh yes, I remember. What did you study before you changed?
I studied law.
Why didn't you continue?
I found some of the subjects interesting enough. In fact, the criminal area was fascinating in general. But a lot of the law is very technical. It's full of little details which can be very difficult to understand. And I've got a terrible memory too. I could never get all the rules and exceptions into my head. My number one hate really was international trade, which was a minefield of rules and exceptions. In fact, I think it was a complete nightmare.
But law is such a popular subject. Lots of people would like to study it.
I'm sure they would, but they often don't realise that it's very book-based. You spend most of your time reading about famous cases sitting in a stuffy library, and very occasionally you get out to a lecture or maybe a seminar.
What do you find that's better about psychology?
Most of all, I like the experimental psychology we have to study. This involves doing something, so it's practical, and with any luck you can make a small, very small, contribution to knowledge. And it is so useful in many careers, for example, business, commerce, education.
Law is too, you know.
Yes, but the training is so long. You have to spend at least another 2 years on a professional practice course before you can start working. No, I'm happy with psychology.
Well, as a psychology student too, I must say I agree with absolutely everything you've said, of course.
Now turn to Section 2. Section 2. You are going to hear a student arranging to transfer between English classes. She is leaving a message on the Language Department's answering machine. The student's name is Mei Lee. First look at questions 11 to 17. As you listen to the first part of the talk, answer questions 11 to 17.
Hello, this is May Lee speaking. This message is for Mrs. Brooks in Student Affairs. Mrs. Brooks, I telephoned you last week and you told me to call back and put the details of my request to transfer on the answering machine. I hope you can hear me easily. I have the form here and I'll give you the information working from the top to the bottom. As you know, my family name is Lee, spelled L-E-E, and my first name is May. My student number is 002312. That's 002312. I'm in Mr. Anderson's class. You know, he's the one who helps out with the football team. The next part of the form asks for my address. I'll give it slowly. I live at Flat 5, 10 University Avenue. You probably know the building. It's just near the engineering school. The telephone number is 818-6074, and I share it with a lot of other people, so it's often engaged. I'll give it to you again. 818-6074. I think that's all I have to put on this part of the form. I know you were curious about my reason for requesting a transfer, so I'll explain that next.
Now look at questions 18 to 22. As May Lee continues her message, answer questions 18 to 22.
Now I'll tell you why I want to transfer between classes. Mrs. Brooks, I really like my teacher and my classmates, but I find it very hard not to speak in my own language. I just begin to think in English when the class ends, and I'm surrounded by other people from my country, so it's natural that we all speak in our mother tongue. I have been looking around for a class where there are very few other people from my country, so I'll be forced to use English. The best class I can find is the evening class, which begins at 6 p.m. Most of the students in that class come from countries which speak Spanish, and I can't speak a word, so I must use English. I have an Italian friend in the class, and she tells me there are 2 Hong Kong Chinese, 6 Spanish speakers, and 1 Japanese student. She says most people speak English at the break, although sometimes the Spanish slip into their own language. I checked the class list, and 2 students have dropped out of the evening class, so there should be room for me. Could you please see if I can join the class? I'm not sure what the class number is, but the evening class I want is in room 305 of the Trotter building. The class I'm in now is next door to the Trotter building in Prince Tower, so it's very easy for me to find my way to the new class. I'm not going home until late today, so could you please leave a message for me at my friend Margaret's house? Her number is 812-7543, and she has an answering machine. I do hope you can transfer me, Mrs. Brooks. If there is any more information you need, please call me. Thank you very much.
That is the end of section 2. You will now have some time to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 3 on page 12. Section 3. You will hear 2 students discussing a project they have to do as part of a literature course on great books. First, you have some time to look at questions 21 to 25 on page 12. Now listen carefully and answer questions 21 to 25.
Hi, Joey. How are you doing? I heard you were sick.
Oh, hi, Olivia. Yeah, I had a virus last week, and I missed a whole pile of lectures, like the first one on the great books in literature, where Dr. Castle gave us all the information about the semester project.
I can give you copies of the handouts. I've got them right here.
But that's okay. I already collected the handouts, but I'm not very clear about all the details. I know we each have to choose an individual author. I think I'm going to do Carlos Castaneda. I'm really interested in South American literature.
Have you checked he's on the list that Dr. Castle gave us? We can't just choose anyone.
Yeah, I checked. It's okay. Who did you choose?
Well, I was thinking of choosing Ernest Hemingway, but then I thought, no, I'll do a British author, not an American one. So I chose Emily Bronte.
Okay. And first of all, it says we have to read a biography of our author. I guess it's okay if we just look up information about him on the internet?
No, it's got to be a full-length book. I think the minimum length's 250 pages. There's a list of biographies. Didn't you get that?
Oh, right. I didn't realize we had to stick with that. So, what do we have to do when we've read the biography?
Well, then we have to choose one work by the writer. Again, it's got to be something quite long. We can't just read a short story.
But I guess a collection of short stories would be okay?
Yes, or even a collection of poems, they said. But I think most people are doing novels. I'm going to do Wuthering Heights. I've read it before, but I really want to read it again now I've found out more about the writer.
And then the video. We have to make a short video about our author and about the book. How long has it got to be?
A minute.
What? Like 60 seconds? We got to give all the important information about their life and the book we choose?
Well, you can't do everything. I wrote it down somewhere. Yes, Dr. Castle said we had to find or write a short passage that helps to explain the author's passion for writing, why they're a writer. So we can back this up with reference to important events in the writer's life, if they're relevant. But it's up to us, really. The video's meant to portray the essence of the writer's life and the piece of writing we choose.
So when we read the biography, we have to think about what kind of person our writer is.
Yes, and the historical context and so on. So for my writer, Emily Bronte, the biography gave a really strong impression of the place where she lived and the countryside around.
Right. I'm beginning to get the idea.
Before you hear the rest of the talk, you have some time to look at questions 26 to 30 on page 13. Now listen and answer questions 26 to 30.
Can I check the other requirements with you?
Sure.
The handout said after we'd read the biography, we had to read the work we'd chosen by our author and choose a passage that's typical in some way, that typifies the author's interests and style.
Yes, but at the same time, it has to relate to the biographical extract you choose. There's got to be some sort of theme linking them.
Okay, I'm with you.
And then you have to think about the video.
So are we meant to dramatize the scene we choose?
I guess we could, but there's not a lot of time for that. I think it's more how we can use things like sound effects to create the atmosphere, the feeling we want.
And presumably visuals as well?
Yeah, of course. I mean, I suppose that's the whole point of making a video. But whatever we use has to be historically in keeping with the author.
We can use things like digital image processing to do it all.
So we can use any computer software we want.
Sure. And it's important that we use a range, not just one software program. That's actually one of the things we're assessed on.
Okay.
Oh, and something else that's apparently really important is to keep track of the materials we use and to acknowledge them.
Including stuff we download off the internet, presumably?
Yeah, so our video has to list all the material used with details of the source in a bibliography at the end.
Okay. And you were talking about assessment of the project. Did they give us the criteria? I couldn't find anything on the handout.
Sure. He gave us them in the lecture. Let's see, you get 25% just for getting all the components done. That's both sets of reading and the video. Then the second part is actually how successful we are at getting the essence of the work. They call that content, and that counts for 50%. Then the last 25% is on the video itself, the artistic and technical side.
Great. Well, that sounds a lot of work, but a whole lot better than just handing in a paper. Thanks a lot, Olivia.
You're welcome.
That is the end of Section 3. You now have half a minute to check your answers.
Now turn to Section 4. Section 4. You will hear a talk by a health studies lecturer on anxiety. First, you have some time to look at questions 31 to 40. Listen carefully and answer questions 31 to 40.
My talk today is on anxiety. Anxiety is something you've all experienced at some time in your life, so you'll know that it's an emotional condition in which feelings of dread, fear, and mental agitation predominate. However, what we call an anxiety state, or anxiety neurosis, or phobic state, they all mean the same thing, is characterized by anxiety reactions far greater than those normally expected for the circumstances, and these reactions may be severe and prolonged. This is the most common form of neurosis in westernized countries. Usually, normal anxiety decreases with repeated exposure to the feared situation, whereas a neurotic anxiety tends to increase. Gradually, the person is inclined to avoid the feared situation and views it with increasing dread. Sometimes there may be an inherited tendency for this, but usually environmental issues are more important. The individual may have been a worrier throughout life, and a stressful condition, just before symptoms set in, is common. Often there is a gradual build-up of anxiety, possibly for weeks or months before the ultimate break occurs. The precipitating cause is usually one of great significance to the patient, often related to personal events, such as bereavement, a breakup, threats to career, health, or personal integrity. What are the symptoms of phobia? Well, phobic states often develop into severe, crippling challenges that can be very difficult to overcome. The person develops a fear of certain situations. It's not uncommon to have one or more of these present at the same time. I'm going to name some frequent phobias and give you a description of their symptoms. Let's start with agoraphobia, which is when the person has an intense anxiety about venturing outside the safety of the normal home surroundings. It may be impossible for this person to ever go out alone. Their fear of public or open spaces is completely irrational, and they often end up leading very secluded lives. Claustrophobia, on the other hand, is a morbid fear of closed-in areas or places. If you see me taking the stairs instead of the lift, think about it. Am I trying to get more exercise, or am I trying to avoid the confined interior of the lift? And I'm sure you all know people who are afraid of flying. Sometimes it's the fear of being enclosed in the aeroplane itself, and you can imagine how the cramped confines of airline toilets are really bad news for these sufferers. Now I'll move on to discuss social phobia, which, believe it or not, is more common in men. It's an acute anxiety that develops when they are in the presence of others. They feel self-conscious, apprehensive, and embarrassed. If attention, real or imagined, is focused on the sufferer, he becomes uneasy and may blush, stammer, or stutter. Some sufferers even develop tremors, shaking or trembling movements of a part or parts of the body. Or another very common sign of their extreme discomfort is that they perspire profusely on their palms, under their arms, or on their feet. That brings me to the last one that I want to mention today, and that is single phobia. And no, it's not a fear of lifelong bachelorhood. This one is actually precipitated by an acute aversion to dogs, cats, spiders. You may have heard of the term arachnophobia. Well, it applies specifically to spiders, but any single thing can basically cause a strong aversion. Snakes, frogs, mice, or rats, for instance. I can assure you the list is unlimited. You name it, and someone is sure to have a phobia about it. Some people are terrified of the dark, for example, and I'm not talking about young children here. You'd be surprised how many adults are afflicted in this way. Well, I see our time is up. Next week I'll go into some of the treatments and therapies for phobias that have been used over the ages, and some of the relatively new drugs that have recently come on the scene.
That is the end of Section 4. You now have half a minute to check.